Hello, and welcome to the Jewish Policy Center webinar. I am Shoshana Bryan, Senior Director of the JPC and your host. Our guest today is Hussain Abdul-Hussain of the Foundation for Defense of Democracies, who will give us the skinny on Saudi Arabia, not the headlines. We don't do that. There has been a clear shift in the tone coming from Saudi Arabia, and more than that, you can, and I know you do, follow the details on your preferred media. We're going to talk about motivation. What moves the Saudi government? Is it economics and oil? Those are always high on the list. Is it the US and trust in our government? Is it the UAE or Israel or Turkey? What do the Saudis see when they look across the region, and what do they want to see? And most important, how is MBS, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, working on those problems from his point of view? But before we go to Hussain, your JPC commercial. The JPC was founded in 1985. We are a nonprofit organization providing analysis of foreign and domestic policies. We support a strong American defense capability, U.S.-Israel security cooperation, and missile defense. Most important right now, we support the legitimacy and permanence and security of Israel against anyone who would deny them. And as it has been since October 7th, our priority is to support efforts of the government of Israel and the IDF to defend the people of Israel, both inside their borders and, when necessary, beyond those borders. We support justice in Gaza. We are relieved and grateful that the last remaining hostage, Ron Kvili, has been returned to his family and his country. But justice for Gaza, including for Palestinians in Gaza, means disarming Hamas and removing it from any semblance of governing power. As an organization that sits slightly to the right of center, the JPC advocates domestically for small government, low taxes, free trade, fiscal responsibility, energy security, free speech, and intellectual diversity. Yes, it's a very long strip. You can find us on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org. That's jewishpolicycenter.org. There you can read our insight articles, our In Context blog, and our magazine In Focus Quarterly. The winter issue of In Focus is up now. It's our opening to America's 250th birthday. You can also find our webinar programming and binge watch. Excuse me. And now our guest, Hussain Abdul-Hussain, who you've seen here before, is a research fellow at the research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He focuses on the Gulf region and Yemen, on Gulf relations with Iran, and Gulf peace with Israel. But he was born and raised in Beirut, Baghdad, and Baalbek, cities that have been at the center of major Middle East events in the past couple of decades. Hussain earned a degree in history and archaeology from the American University of Beirut. He's worked as a reporter and managing editor at Beirut's Daily Star newspaper and reported from war zones on the Lebanese border with Israel and Iraq. In Washington, Hussain helped to set up and manage the Arabic satellite network, Al Hura Iraq, after which he headed the Washington bureau of the Kuwaiti Al Rai. He's been a visiting fellow with London's Chatham House and has published in English in the New York Times and Washington Post. He's probably the only guy you want to read in either of those outlets. We'll see what happens to the Washington Post next. He's been quoted everywhere you think he would, and he is a frequent commentator in Arabic on major Arabic satellite networks. He also wrote for In Focus Quarterly. His article in the summer of 2021, Why There Is No Palestinian State, is a must-read. Especially now it's a must-read. You can find it on our website, jewishpolicycenter.org, under publications. And now, Hussain, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Shoshana, and thanks in order to JBC for inviting me. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. The issue of Saudi Arabia feels like a heartbreaker for someone like me. Ever since King Salman and his son Mohammed known as MBS, came to power in 2015. They seem to be, MBS in particular, seem to be a new face, a young guy, a reformer, someone we could bet on to transform Saudi Arabia and transform the region. And of course, he started on the right foot. He did suppress Islamism within Saudi Arabia. He did solve the problem of uh, power succession in Saudi Arabia. The Saudi leadership, stopped being a bunch of old guys, himself being a very young man. And most important of all, he started speaking a different language in terms of peace. He has a dozen of um, statements in which he said that he didn't think that Israel was an enemy, but a potential ally. He excuse me, he walked back the idea that Saudi Arabia would wait until there's a Palestinian state for it to sign peace with Israel. The phrase Palestinian state was substituted for a phrase a credible pathway to a state. So, and there's a huge difference between the two. So until this earlier last year, Saudi Arabia and MBS were saying the right things, doing them the right way. I was a big fan and I was a supporter of the direction they were going until they stopped going in this direction. Over the past few months, people who observed the kingdom, like myself, noticed that there had been an uptick in anti-Semitism, anti-American rhetoric in Saudi media, social media, in Friday sermons. Of course, all of these imams are government employees. Their speeches, their sermons are approved by the Ministry of Religious Affairs. Uh, and when I started seeing the change, I started ringing the alarm. Just, I was alarmed that the Saudis were backtracking. Now, keep in mind that even after October 7, which everyone thought was an attempt by Iran and its proxies to throw a wrench and stop the process of normalization between the Saudis and Israel, even after October 7, the Saudis still issued statements in which they said that October 7 did not derail normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel. So they kept on hanging on to the idea of peace until they stopped, and this is recent. Now, what I'll try to explain to you here is why I think this is happening. The whole premise of MBS was to transform his country from a country that relied on oil revenue. They export, Saudi Arabia is the biggest producer of oil, 9 or 10 million barrels a day. They export the oil and they use the revenue to fund the state. This worked for a long time, starting in the 1950s and up until probably the late 1990s. In 1976, the population of Saudi Arabia was around 8 million. Today, 2026, the population is 38 million. In 1976, the revenue of oil for Saudi Arabia was astronomical. The number of producers of oil were a fraction of what they are now. Today, in 2026, this past month of January, the global oil market had a surplus of 4.2 million barrels of oil a day. So you can imagine that there's a lot of oil and demand is not as big as supply. So this suppresses the price. For Saudi Arabia to break even, it has budgeted its annual budget at $95 for the barrel of oil. Throughout 2025, the barrel of oil averaged at $65. That's almost 1/3 of losses. And as such, Saudi Arabia had to borrow. Its deficit in 2025 stood at $65 billion, or 5.5, almost 6% of GDP. That's a big number for a country like, even for a country like Saudi Arabia, which is one of the 20 biggest economies in the world. So, as you observe what's going on in economics, you understand that the idea that MBS had to transform Saudi Arabia from an oil economy to a services and knowledge-based economies, emulating the UAE and Dubai and these countries that have managed to do so, has failed. As we speak right now, uh, the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, which is a neighbor of Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, the UAE has managed to diversify its economy to the extent that oil contributes only 20% of the Emirati GDP. Saudi Arabia, the percent is still 40%. Kuwait is even worse, 60%. So these oil countries, as oil is going down and population is going up, they can't make ends meet. They have to diversify, they have to come up with other ideas. MBS was seemingly going in the right direction of diversification and following the UAE lead. I think, or it seems to me, that he's come to the conclusion that this is not happening. A lot of his investments went bust. His signature project, Neom, which is this modern city to the northwest of Saudi Arabia, very close to Jordan and Israel, and the tip of the Red Sea. The Neom is bust. A lot of other projects are bust. A lot of investments are not giving him any returns. So, and on top of it, Saudi Arabia is cash strapped, despite all the oil that they export, but they don't have any surplus of cash at hand. So they have to resort to extraordinary measures, such as selling part of Aramco, their oil producing company, on the stock market to collect cash. So the situation is not as rosy. My guess is that when governments face such issues, and when they realize that they can't really fix them structurally, they revert to populism. And this is what Turkey and Recep Tayyip Erdogan did. You know, the Turkish economy expanded enormously and amazingly, and then when it hit a slump, we saw that Erdogan's rhetoric shifted from a guy who wanted to join the European Union and who received Ariq Sharon in Turkey and who was a friend of Israel. Now he's one of the most notorious Muslim Brotherhood rivals, almost an enemy of Israel. I think what we're seeing in Saudi Arabia is similar. After MBS realized that he can't really transform the economy, he went back to the default setting, and the default setting in Saudi Arabia is Islamism. So he's been realigning. Now he's very close to Turkey and Qatar, the two biggest Muslim Brotherhood governments in the region, who are, you know, the most opponents of Israel with venom, of course. So he is realigning, and when he gets closer to Turkey, MBS is realigning. When he gets closer to Turkey and Qatar, he gets further away from the UAE and the other moderate capitals, especially the ones who have signed Abraham Accords for peace with Israel, like the UAE and Bahrain and Morocco. So this is, in a nutshell, what I think is happening. The defense minister of Saudi Arabia visited Washington last week. And he said that it's nonsense that their media is peddling Islamism all over again, that they're getting far away from peace. He denied, you know, whatever's happening. But again, you know, I kept on monitoring media. Nothing changed. They're still at it. They're still going after the United States. They're still going after Zionism, calling Israel the Zionist entity. Sometimes they're going after the Jews. Accusing Israel of having a plan to partition all these states in the Middle East to dominate. So at this point, you can't really tell the difference between the Saudi media and Al Jazeera and the Qatari media. The last note I will say here, because the KBS, the brother of MBS, KBS is the defense minister. What Khalid bin Salman said in his visit to Washington was that this is social media, or you know, this is not us. Anyone who knows Saudi Arabia knows that pundits, daily newspapers, even if they're not owned by the state, they peddle the state, they endorse the state's line. There's no one who writes anything that the state disagrees with or disapproves of. The same applies to their satellite channels, Al Arabiya, Al Hadath. And on social media, everyone knows that Saudi Arabia has what they call the army of electronic flies. And these are accounts that swarm. They go against opponents. They support whoever they like or support. So what we see in the social media and the media and on TV, on Saudi TV, is the official line, and it's unfortunate that now they're taking this line. I hope they come back. I don't see it happening.
So I'm going to ask you about the comeback later, but for the moment, if a lot of this is oil driven and economics driven, talk, if you will, about the U.S. plan for Iran. There did seem to be a plan that we were going to liberate the people of Iran, and it no longer quite looks like that. But something's happening. And if I were Saudi Arabia, I might be concerned that if Iran is no longer a sanctioned country, no longer a pariah country, which it is in many parts of the world, two things might happen. One would be economic, but the other could be an alliance between Israel and Iran, two countries that historically have gotten together well, and that would make me nervous if I were Saudi Arabia. So can you address the Iran question both from the economic point of view and from the political point of view?
Well, that's a great question, and I probably missed the part where many of us, when we thought that Saudi Arabia was going to normalization with Israel, we believe that one of the driving factors was their fear of Iran. With the United States scaling back in the Middle East, or with the United States being inconsistent and unreliable. We see what happened to the Kurds, our allies. We just threw them under the bus this last week or the week before. We've done this so many times. So a country like Saudi Arabia in 2019, they were struck by missiles coming from Iran. Their oil facility, Al-Qayq, was struck, and they were unhappy that we, the United States, didn't strike back or come to the rescue or help them overcome Iranian bullying. So as long as this was the case, Saudi Arabia calculated that if Iran comes after the Saudis next time, their best bet would be Israel as a counterbalance. And we thought that this fear would bring Israel and Saudi Arabia closer together. And it worked for some time until June last year, when during the 12-day war between Israel and Iran, Israel did weaken Iran significantly. And to my mind, this freed the Saudis from the Iranian menace. So now this is another reason why the Saudis are not concerned about Iran, and this frees them from trying to make nice or promise Israel normalization. This is on the one hand. On the other hand, it's much more in the interest of Saudi Arabia to have a weak and Iran, whose government is under global sanctions, than to have a revamped Iran that's in alliance with Israel, with the United States, that can project a different vibe in the region. This is number one. Number two, and this is much more important, Saudi Arabia, as I said, is the biggest producer and exporter of oil in the world. And also, as I have said, last month there was 4.2 million barrels on any given day offered on the market, on the oil market. If Iran is revamped and comes back, you can expect that the Iranians will bring another 5 million barrels to the market. And of course, we've seen Venezuela, with change happening in Venezuela in the coming few years as investments start paying off, because we know that the Venezuelan oil infrastructure needs a lot of investment and repair and expansion. With Venezuelan oil coming back online, with the Iranian oil coming back online, that will make oil cheaper than Coca-Cola. So that's something that the Saudis don't want to see happen. They don't have an interest in having oil become as cheap. So we have seen all along over the past few weeks during the standoff between the United States and Iran, we have seen the Saudis trying to convince us that try to get a settlement, something like an Obama deal, you know. They ship away their uranium, they enrich uranium, they cap enrichment at 1.5%. They give up the ballistic missile program, and they promise not to support Hezbollah and the other proxies around the region. And of course, you know, we know that when the Iranians promise, you know, that's it. Everyone will be happy. So the point here is that this is the reason why the Saudis have been on the side of not striking Iran. You know, they like what they see now. They like the Iran that they see. We, the supporters of democracy and liberty around the world and in the United States, we don't like what we see. We saw that the Iranian regime killed 35,000 over the span of 2 or 3 days, which is outrageous. We want our government to really twist the arm of the Iranian regime and force it to do things it hasn't done in its life. Whether this comes or not, you know, we no one can tell. But you know, the Saudi position is not really supportive of what we think should happen.
Okay, it's not supportive of what we think should happen, but do they have any confidence that the United States can carry out its plan? Part of the problem, it seems to me, of U.S.-Saudi relations, I'm leaving Israel to the side here on purpose for the moment, is that the Saudis understand a couple of things. First of all, that we change governments every 4 years, or we can change governments every 4 or every 8, and we don't always follow through. So sometimes we make big threats. President Obama made threats along with the Iran deal. If you don't do this, there will be a penalty, right? They didn't seem to care. Do they have a hesitation about following the United States that's deeper than just this moment? Do they have a basic unwillingness to follow us where we say we're going?
Well, look, I said that inconsistency is an issue. It's a problem that we have in the region, and it's not always when we change government. Sometimes within the same government.
Yes.
And I'll give you an example. Lebanon, you know, since November 2024, when under President Biden, when Lebanon and Israel signed the cessation of hostilities. This is only November 2024. It's not been 2 years. We have so far had 3 presidential envoys and 2 ambassadors, 5 people handling Lebanon over the span of less than 2 years, each one of them coming up with a different plan and different instructions and different ideas. If you are the president of Lebanon, Joseph Aoun, and America is telling you to take on Hezbollah and disarm it, and you have our support, and you stick your neck out, and Hezbollah comes after you, and Hezbollah really decimates you, who will come to your rescue? If you watch how America behaved with the Kurds when, you know, Julani, the Al-Qaeda, the president of Syria, al-Shara, went after the Kurds, our allies, who were, you know, our major fighting force against ISIS, we just let them be beaten. So if you're Joseph Aoun and watching, you're thinking, okay, maybe I shouldn't bet on the United States. So if you're Saudi Arabia, you're probably thinking the same. You're thinking, God knows what happens next. Either the United States breaks the Iranian regime, or it gives it the keys to the region. So this inconsistency that makes the United States an unreliable ally for many parties in the Middle East, this is what pushes many of them to not do what otherwise would have done. You know, so in an ideal world, I think that the government of Lebanon would have loved to take it on Hezbollah and disarm it. But, you know, they're always hedging, and they're thinking maybe the Iranians and the Americans come to an agreement, and then Hezbollah's off the hook, and Iran will get money again, and it will support and fund Hezbollah again. Who knows? So the Lebanese are scared that in case there's a deal, a breakthrough between Washington and Tehran, then, you know, they'll be on the wrong side of everything. And this applies to the Saudis too. You know, the Saudis are thinking, even if they wanted the Iran regime gone, let's forget about oil and the other stuff. Even if they think we're Sunni and these guys are Shia, and we hate them, and they hate us, and hate has been going on for 1400 years now, and we'll be happy if they're taken down. But even if they decide to say that out loud, and then we end up having a deal with Iran, they're stuck with animosity with the Iranians for a long time to come. So this is also part of the calculus that we are unpredictable. This makes our friends and allies really can't tell what comes next, and they were really hunkered down and take the side of Iran until they figure out what happens next.
Okay, so now I'm going to introduce Israel and the UAE. Also, it seems to me that some of these people who are concerned about the strength of the U.S. commitment to their positions believe that Israel might be a better ally. The Druze in Syria are doing better by being allied with Israel than the Kurds are being allied with the United States at the moment. I could have seen a position where the Lebanese government would have worked with Israel and let Israel deal with Hezbollah for them, at least in the short run. I don't know about the long run. But talk about the UAE, if you would. First of all, because the UAE-Israel alliance, I don't want to call it an alliance, friendship, arrangement, whatever they call it, seems to be extremely stable. And Saudi Arabia's relationship with UAE appears to have cratered. I'm going to ask you about shooting in Yemen in a minute, but even before that, talk to us, if you would, about UAE-Saudi relations and how they've been going.
So the UAE is a classic textbook success story of doing things the right way and reaping rewards. So they understood that there will come a time when oil will not be enough to sustain their luxurious lifestyle. So they diversified. And they understood for you to do that, an economy like the Israeli economy, which is exactly the size of the Emirati economy. So we're talking roughly both countries, each one of them has 10 million people, and each one is roughly 600 billion, slightly more than half a trillion. Saudi Arabia's GDP is double that. Saudi Arabia is 1.2 trillion. But the point here is that these mid-sized economies, especially Israel is not an oil economy. It's the strength of its economy is based on technology, trade, services, universities, medicine, you name it. And the United Arab Emirates understood that opening up to this economy in the region is really in your interest if you want to diversify. And we've seen bilateral trade between the two sides boom. Like I think now it's 3 trillion or something. They want to bring it up to 10 trillion. So this is unlike Jordan and Egypt. This is not a glorified ceasefire where you pretend that you have a peace treaty and you get handouts from the United States as a reward for your pretending to be at peace. This is genuine peace. If you visit the United Arab Emirates, you will see Israelis all over the place with T-shirts with Hebrew letters on them. So they're not hiding, they're not scared. This is actual genuine peace. So the Emiratis understood that it's in their interest, and that's when they signed the Abraham Accords, they said this is a sovereign decision that serves the interests of the United Arab Emirates. And it did. And we want every country, including Lebanon, to do the same. We want Lebanon to think, listen, the Israeli economy is 45 times the size of your economy, and it's only across the border. So if you sign peace, no matter how you slice it, it's purely in Lebanon's interest. And add to it that there's no real dispute between Lebanon and Israel. There are 13 border points, and these are actual points. It's not like big territory and anything. So the Emiratis did the right thing and reaped the rewards for it. We're trying to encourage, the Bahrainis are trying to do the same. I think, they have benefited to an extent from Abraham Accords. The Moroccans are doing roughly the same, but Morocco is a much bigger population than these two. And then we're trying to push the Lebanese, maybe the Syrians to follow suit. Now, Saudi Arabia was supposed to do this, but like I said, I think, they reasoned that this is not happening. So they went back to what they used to do. Islamism, live off of oil revenue, use populism. Populism deflects attention, by the way, from your domestic trouble. If your economy is facing domestic trouble, you need enemies. Enemies are good if your economy is in trouble. And this brought Saudi Arabia to to a standoff with the UAE because number one, the Saudi Arabia stopped doing what the Emiratis are doing, and this meant that now you have two models that are clashing. Plus, the Saudi Arabia doesn't want to see other countries succeed where the Saudis failed. So to me, this seems to be the main driver behind the conflict between the two. And to add to it, I think the Saudis are overestimating their power and they're overplaying their hand. And they think that they can take on the Emiratis and really hurt them. And I think we know how this will end up. And the reason we know that is because a few years back, maybe a decade ago, Saudi Arabia did the same with Qatar. And, they got the UAE, Egypt, and Bahrain, and they imposed this boycott of Qatar or siege, whatever we call it. And then a few years after that, turns out that they couldn't affect Qatar by any means. So that Qatar experience showed Saudi Arabia as the emperor without clothes. So why would you repeat such an exercise with another Gulf country that is much bigger and much stronger than Qatar itself? Qatar only has 350,000 people, a tiny population. The UAE is much bigger, its revenue is much bigger, diversification much bigger, its international relations is much stronger than Qatar. So why take on the UAE? To me, same populism, and what happened in Yemen. I think
tell us what happened in Yemen, because not everybody's aware of what was going on.
So Yemen since 2014, 2015, a bunch of Yemenis who are in alliance with Iran took over Sana'a, the capital. So these Yemenis are Zaydis. We call them Shia, but they're not. But anyway, let's assume that they're Shia. They took over Sana'a and the capital and most of Yemen, the northern part. Saudi Arabia decided that they wanted to restore the government, the Sunni government, to Sana'a. They waged this war that lasted for 7-8 years, and that ended with a stalemate. They couldn't dislodge the Houthis. So after the war stopped, you have Yemen divided roughly into two, North Yemen and South Yemen. North is Houthi only, no Saudis, no Emiratis, no one. South is the coalition that Saudi Arabia led in the war, which is basically Saudi Arabia, the UAE. The other Gulf countries were in the coalition, but they quit fast, like Kuwait and Bahrain and Qatar. So south of Yemen has militias that are loyal either to Saudi Arabia or to the UAE. In December, the militias that were loyal to the UAE decided that they want to declare South Yemen as an independent country. Now, South Yemen is a country that existed between 1960 and 1990. It was never part of Yemen. But in 1990, they decided that we're merging with the North. And since then, they've regretted it. And now they're saying, okay, the North is not ours. We're reviving our state in the South. So what these guys, the pro-Emirat guys said was that we're reviving South Yemen. And they went and they took over the headquarters of rival militias. This is where Saudi Arabia felt that it had lost every influence in Yemen, and it sent in its air force. So that's how serious the Saudis were about this. And the Saudis don't really have strong militias on the ground, so they had to rely on the Muslim Brotherhood Party in Yemen, known as the Islah Party. And these were the foot soldiers through which the Saudis regained influence, kicked out the pro-Emirati militia. And since then, things have been really bad and sour between Saudi Arabia and the UAE. The Emiratis, the way they've been handling this is that they said, okay, when the Saudis asked that the Emiratis leave Yemen, the Emiratis left. The Saudis attack the Emiratis. The Emiratis do not counter. So the Emiratis are just sitting back and saying, okay, you do you. We're not responding. But at the same time, the Emiratis are not being they're not being hurt by this. They're containing it. And the Saudis keep on pushing, but I don't think they will dislodge the Emiratis or beat them.
So let me look at it from a different angle. All of this is happening at the bottom of the Red Sea. And you have Yemen over here. And over here, you have Somaliland. And Israel has now recognized Somaliland, leading to some others to recognize Somaliland. If I were the Saudis and I looked at the relationship between the UAE and Israel, and the UAE is over here and Israel is over here, am I not cut off at the bottom of the Red Sea if they really don't like me? So is there some pressure from larger events? Now, the Israelis have not put military assets in Somaliland, but it's not inconceivable because Israel needs the Red Sea and needs that passageway to be open too. It's in Israel's interest, separate from Saudi interest. Is that like poking them with a stick?
It is if the Saudis are the ones who are, who declare themselves to be at the enemies of the Emiratis and the Israelis. But until 2 months ago, if a Saudi ship tried to sail through any point that was controlled by the Emiratis or the Israelis, theoretically, I'm sure they'd let it go. So they wouldn't stop, they wouldn't pirate or stop or intercept a Saudi ship. So there's no reason if the Emiratis, even if we assume that the Emiratis or the Israelis are taking over this strait, the Bab el-Mandeb, on the southern edge of the Red Sea that connects it to the Indian Ocean, even if they do, you as Saudi Arabia shouldn't be threatened. Maybe the ones who should be threatened are the Houthis, the pro-Iran guys, the Iranian ships. I mean, these guys would be threatened, but not the Saudis. So there's no reason why the Saudis would feel threatened about this. Now, my regret is that what you see is that the Saudis are parting ways with all these entities or states that are successful. My support towards Somaliland has nothing to do with history or who's right or who's wrong. My support is because this is one of the few bright spots, a small region that's theoretically part of the Somalia country, but this region that suffered a massacre by Somalia against it has since fixed itself, and they have a functioning state and institutions, an election and parliament, and their president was elected a year ago, the rotation of power. Everything you want to see in a state, you can find in Somaliland. So why not let these guys, have this country and ask others to do like them, to emulate them? And when this happened, this happened to an extent with support and influence from the Emiratis. The main port of Somaliland, Berbera, has been built with investments from the Emiratis and under supervision by the Emiratis. The Emiratis thinking that this is a great port and this is a great entrance for them to connect with their interest in African countries. And now the Israelis thought, okay, now if these guys, the Somaliland people who are, who want to be our friends, so why not befriend them? So now you have two nations that are befriending the Somaliland. Of course, Israel can eventually use any alliance with Somaliland to offset the Houthis across the pond, because they're really close down the south of the Red Sea. And the Emiratis are happy, with this connection. So this is working. We have to expand the model of Somaliland, not expand Somaliland itself, but just, the model. Just ask Djibouti to become like Somaliland. Ask Somalia to become like Somaliland. Not kill Somaliland and insist that it goes back to the failing state of Somalia. By the way, the government of Somalia is so weak that they live in the airports of Mogadishu. They barely control anything outside the capital. The countryside is run and managed by Shabab, which is Al-Qaeda franchise. So the country is really in a terrible position, in terrible shape. And on top of it, they are currently on the Security Council. So,
Yeah.
they are represented on the Security Council on behalf of the Arab bloc. So I'm not sure which, how we're dealing with this, but it doesn't seem right to me.
Well, it seems like some countries have one view of how to deal with it, and some countries have another. But the U.S. has its only permanent base in Africa, in Djibouti, and so they're right by it. And it makes perfect sense then to have the Americans who are well entrenched in Djibouti and the Israelis and the UAE befriending the people of Somaliland. There was a rumor that Somalia itself had asked to join the Abraham Accords. I think that rumor went away, but but I think there are people in the region who see Israel as a positive presence, and there are people who worry about it. Um, see how it goes. So we have a question here that someone has written into us, and he's going to ask us to broaden the conversation a little bit. And the question is, to what extent did President Trump's embrace of Qatar and Turkey demonstrate to MBS that being good doesn't necessarily pay? So being pro-American doesn't. In other words, had Trump distanced Turkey and Qatar and embraced MBS more, he asks, would we be in a different position today? So
Yeah,
how much of this is following what we've chosen to do?
absolutely. That's a great question, and I totally agree with the premise that MBS looked around and saw that the Muslim Brotherhood in Qatar and Turkey can get away with murder, literally. They
Mhm.
can support Hamas, they can support the Muslim Brotherhood, and they will still get our love and praise. I think and I talked about inconsistency, U.S. inconsistency in the Middle East. What I didn't say is that there's even something worse than inconsistency, is that we tend to reward our enemies like Turkey and Qatar, and we tend to pick fights with our friends like Israel and the UAE. I don't know why we do that, but we keep on doing it. And this is not good because this encourages uh, people to be on our bad side. It just seems to be that we don't like people who are our friends. We have our mainstream media going after them. And, our government is, often feels embarrassed dealing with them. But if you are our enemy, you're safe. So if you are MBS and you're watching and you're thinking, what's the point of repressing all these Islamists? Because after 9/11, the Saudis did a great job repressing all these radical type Islamists. Now, I'm not sure they're still doing it as much. They think, because if you are Saudi Arabia, Islamism is your best tool to project influence beyond your borders, whether it's in Somalia or in Bosnia or in Pakistan, anywhere. You know, you have you have a huge claim on Islamism. You host Mecca and Medina, the shrines of Islam. So if you are MBS and you're thinking, okay, let's project influence and let's rely on Islamism, and look at these two Islamist countries who got away with it, and President Trump loves them and Washington loves them. So why not do the same? So I totally agree with this premise. We encourage Saudi Arabia, the current behavior, to get away from Israel and the UAE and get closer to Turkey and Qatar.
So, and it has to be said also that Turkey has troops in Libya and has made its military known in Africa, and we've said nothing. I'm not sure why we think that having Turkish troops in Libya is a useful thing.
They have troops in Libya. They occupy big chunks of Syria. They occupy chunks of Iraq. The area that they control in Syria is almost 9 times the size of the West Bank. No one seems to care. The Turks are just in control of Syrian territory. They occupy northern Cyprus. Their foreign minister said that they're sending ships to Somalia and to Djibouti to offset Somaliland and the Israeli reckoning of Somaliland. So, and for some reason, whatever they say, no one seems to care. And sometimes we even want them to do that. Like, some of us are familiar with the fight, not the fight, but the disagreement between the United States and Israel over the Turkish troops going to Gaza. I mean, it's Turkish troop going to Gaza is just like saying, let's have Hamas reconstitute itself. So and we know that the Turks are trying to get parts of Syria to set up intelligence surveillance near Damascus to take over the T4 air base in Syria, which puts it very close to Israel. So that Turkey wants to control parts of Syria on the northern side of Israel, wants to put troops in the south of Israel in Gaza, and and what do you expect Israel to do then? Like I said, sit back and watch. And even with all of this happening, we still have nothing negative to tell to the Turks. So it's just and you mentioned Shoshana, you mentioned Libya, and we have a huge problem of radical Islamism bouncing back in the Sahel area. So from all in Africa, all the way from the Red Sea to the Atlantic Ocean, from Sudan all the way through Mali to the other side of the. You probably remember 4 Green Berets were killed in Mali.
Absolutely.
And we do have a drone base in Mali. We do have, like you mentioned, a base in Djibouti. We're not doing as much, but our resources are going to Africa. This is a festering problem. The Sudan civil war is a huge problem that we're not dealing with. But as we don't deal with it, terrorism is surging. I mean, these terrorists are rebounding. Al Qaeda, ISIS, you name it, all these types, they are coming back. And now with the Saudis deciding that it's cool to become like Turkey and Qatar, I'm not sure how we can counter these guys.
That actually, though, I wasn't going to go to Africa. I wasn't going to go across Africa, but you're going across Africa, so I will. Israel and Morocco just signed a major security deal, which I suspect has to do with the King of Morocco, who is very much opposed to Islamic fundamentalism, seeing all this trouble south of Morocco. Second tier of Africa is where ISIS has been wandering. And I do believe that the king sees himself as increasingly isolated. From that perspective, you could say the Abraham Accords and the Israel-Morocco relationship is paying off for the Moroccans. Hate to say it because it means that other things are falling apart, but it does sort of mean that.
Absolutely. That's absolutely correct. The UAE has been steadfast in its support of the Abraham Accords. There's no instance when Morocco signaled that they're walking back, just like the Emiratis. So October 7 didn't really shake them. They are relying more on Israel, and Israel is relying more on them. Right next to Morocco, their neighbors, the Algerians, they're a huge pain in the neck because they support all sorts of Hamas and Islamist and radicalist and you name it. So yes, I think the UAE is behaving the same way. Morocco is behaving the same way the UAE is behaving. They are relying on the United States, on their alliance with Israel, on their friendship with other countries, just to keep things going, because otherwise the region will just go crazy.
Yes. So let's go back to Saudi Arabia. We had 2 people sending questions just now about Saudi F-25s. And the first one is Saudi Arabia has the second largest number of Saudi Arabia has the second largest number of F-15s in the world. Is that a detriment for Israel if Saudi Arabia joins with Turkey and Qatar? Does Israel see the Saudis as a military threat, or does Israel see the Saudis as a kind of pain in the, what?
Well, yeah, I can't speak for the F-15s in particular. I think, through our agreements, when we sell these fighter jets to any country, we have stipulations, and sometimes we even have a kill switch. So if they try to use them against Israel, I think there's probably something we can do about it, even stop it or do something. But this said, even if there's nothing we can do, even if they try to use the F-15s in any clash with Israel, the Saudi military force, to my mind, is very incompetent. they couldn't they couldn't affect or influence or do anything to a militia right across their border, and it's literally a militia on donkeys. I mean, these guys are really way behind in terms of technology. Um, those who know the military of Saudi Arabia know that each one of these battalions and organizations, some of them are called the National Guard and the Royal Guard or some other sort of. Each one of these agencies within the military belongs to a prince, and these princes they have their own procurement system. So you have one battalion with Italian hardware, another battalion with American, and the third one with French. And most of the time, these hardware pieces are not compatible and they're not coordinated together. So when they showed up at the border with Yemen, and this is, military experts told me this is the first time that the Saudi army had come together, like, to the same spot. And even when they were there, they were not in harmony. So if I'm Israel, Saudi Arabia is not something to give me a headache in terms of military. Even though they're among the highest spenders in the world, $78 billion a month they spend on their defense.
Say that again. How much?
78 billion, which
Wow.
is quite high in terms of numbers over there.
Yes, thank you. Okay, but now let's go the other way. And someone has asked a question about the Saudi-Pakistani relationship. Now, oddly enough, Pakistan and Israel seem to be on a slightly better platform these days. Talk about Saudi Arabia and Pakistan. Pakistan has a nuclear weapon. Does that, and Saudi Arabia doesn't. Should that worry friends of Israel?
Yes, look, I think in terms of projection of power beyond your border, like, usually countries can project some power across from their border. If you're a neighbor country, they can hurt you or, fight with you. But if you're a country or two removed, it becomes really hard. Except for the United States, there are no countries in the world that can project power so far away from their borders. And Israel is really far away from Pakistan. So there's nothing in the arsenal of Pakistan or in its toolbox that can affect Israel or that can defend Saudi Arabia, which brings me to the point that most of the things that the Saudis do most of the time are just photo ops, whether the trip to the White House or their defense pact with the Pakistanis. So what does a defense pact with the Pakistanis mean? If this is a serious defense pact, it means that if India engages Pakistan in war, the Saudis will have to send their ships and their fighter jets over to Pakistan. No one thinks they will do that. And vice versa. If Saudi is under attack by anyone, then the Pakistanis will have to project power over to Saudi Arabia. Now, mind you, the longest range Pakistan missile can barely get to Riyadh, which is in the middle of Saudi Arabia. It can't even get to Jeddah, which is on the other side of Saudi Arabia. So if Pakistani missiles can get to Jeddah and Mecca, how can they protect Saudi Arabia in case of attack? So take all of this with a grain of salt. They call it defense pact. Maybe they exchange officers. Maybe the Pakistanis send the Saudis some fighting force, like in terms of labor and men to fight. But I don't think it goes beyond that. And this is really primitive when thinking of defense pacts.
Okay, so that's sort of good news. I mean, that's a kind of comforting thought.
Also, let me add,
Yeah.
Shoshana, that Israel has excellent relations with India. So, if we're talking about offsetting one another, I'm not sure the Pakistanis would want to be on Israel's bad side when India is good friends with Israel.
So there was an Indian ambassador to Israel, a wonderful man, who later became India's ambassador to the United States. And he was very fond of saying, India and Israel, there's nothing we can't do together. Together, we are a billion people. And the Israelis all laughed, right?
Exactly.
Together, we're a billion people. Okay, so we're getting close to the end. If I'm Saudi Arabia, and I think, I don't know, maybe I went too far here. Maybe I have trouble with UAE. I don't want the Iranians to be selling oil on the market, you know. But my real problem is not with Israel. I mean, it's not. And in fact, Israel offers some um, positives to me, including, I suppose, if the UAE finishes that overland railroad that's supposed to go through the northern part of Saudi Arabia and then into Israel, that's an economic benefit to all three sides. Can they move back? What can they do if they choose to change the trajectory, which right now is not very positive?
Look, I think the key here is the economy. And the Saudis tried to diversify their economy, but they didn't know what it takes to do that. So they did gimmicks that are not really smart moves. For example, they threw a lot of money on Tesla, became one of the biggest shareholders in Tesla. And then they asked Tesla to invest in Saudi Arabia and open factories in Saudi Arabia. And Tesla said, we're sorry, but that's not how it works. You know, if you become the biggest investor, that it doesn't mean, you know, we just pick the country where it makes sense for us to build a factory or to invest. So they didn't really understand how this works. Had they understood how this works, they would have done like the UAE. They would have gone first to Israel and said, let's have peace. Because this is an intrinsic economic benefit to Saudi Arabia. The way the Saudis are dealing with Israel is still from days past. So the Saudis think that their peace with Israel is a reward to Israel only, that it's not a reward for them. And what we're trying to convince the Saudis is that normalizing ties with Israel is mutual benefit. The Israelis benefit and you benefit as well. And until they realize that, they'll still be facing headwinds in terms of economics. And these headwinds are only going to get more severe with time. If I am MBS, what keeps me awake at night is the trouble that my economy will be facing moving forward. It's neither Israel, nor the Palestinians, nor Yemen, nor the UAE. You know, the region is under control thanks to Israeli muscle and, you know, random American intervention. But there's no threat to the physical security of Saudi Arabia. There's a threat to the economy of Saudi Arabia. And unless they understand that they have an interest of peace with Israel for their own economy, I don't see them doing it. You know, maybe they come to terms with the idea that Israel is a great economy. If you're planning to become a services economy, this is the country you want to be friends with. You know, they have the biggest pool of skilled labor in the region. You know, they have all this tech, they have the biggest number of Nobel laureates. I mean, you name it. So if you want to move to a knowledge economy, this is where you go. He announced, or he said that that was his plan, but then he didn't act on the plan. MBS, I mean.
So you said if you were MBS, you would think these things. If you were MBS, we wouldn't have this problem. So, and by the way, I think it's important to note that what you said about Saudi Arabia and how it looks at the world, and the Saudis thinking that a peace treaty with Israel is a reward to Israel for things it's done. The Palestinians have the same problem. If you want the benefits for your people, now Hamas doesn't want benefits for its people, forget it. But if you want benefits for your people, the best way to get those benefits is in partnership with someone who knows how to have them and knows how to grow them. So the Palestinians are not in this regard any different than the Saudis. But again, if you were MBS, none of this would be a problem. So we've come to the end of our time. And once again, Hussain, you've taken us around a big space, but I think we understand a lot better now what's motivating not just Saudi Arabia, but the UAE also, and the United States, and Turkey and Qatar. And it's really important to understand those motivations as we watch the news, even if the news makes us ill. So thank you for coming again. Thank you for talking with us. And thank you for making us smarter than we were an hour ago.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Shoshana.